the Browns in 2023, man, they went through a whole circus. And that's despite possessing a top 5 defense. And why do I say circus? Well, the Browns endured one of the craziest quarterback circuses in a long time. Maybe the craziest that I've ever seen in my lifetime. Maybe you've seen something different. But when I say craziest, they went through various different starting quarterbacks, like Deshaun Watson, PJ Walker. There was another one, but it doesn't ring a bell for me, brother. But they eventually settled on Joe Flacco. And why did they end up in this quarterback circus? Well, Deshaun Watson was on and off starting duties and eventually lost for the year by week 10 with a shoulder injury that he suffered in that game against the Baltimore Ravens. And like I said, they were rotating and then losing backup quarterbacks left and right with injury as well. And that forced the Browns' hand. They had to call upon Joe Flacco, who was just sitting on his couch during Thanksgiving. And then he was like, okay, I'll do it. So at least for Flacco, he surprised many. Despite not playing most of the season, he smoothed the offense. He raised the flag and he led the way. And things were kind of smooth sailing for the most part for the Browns on their way to a playoff berth. But unfortunately, for when it came time to face the Houston Texans in that wild card game, yeah, their Cinderella run came to a crushing end as they got their butts whooped by C.J. Stroud and the Texans in that wild card game. So a little bit of an interesting run for Joe Flacco and the Browns. But now your attention turns to, well, back to Deshaun Watson. And that's, for the Browns, that's your top goal going into this season. You better hope that Deshaun Watson starts playing a lot of games because, well, that big fat contract is really starting to disappoint if it hasn't already, if you're the skid marks. And, well, yeah, that contract is starting to look as big of a skid mark as Solo Sikoa in the main event of SummerSlam. Yeah, it's that bad. So anyway, when you look at some of the things that happened in this past offseason, if you're the Cleveland Browns, they're gonna try to bolster this offense. They traded for Jerry Jeudy of the Denver Broncos in return for some 4th and 5th round picks from this past draft. And I'll actually speak my mind on Jerry Jeudy in a little bit. But for the Browns, they re-signed some of their key defensive players like Shelby Harris and Maurice Hurst on the interior defensive line, edge rusher za'darius Smith, and safety Rodney McLeod. So several key players on that defense, they're back. They were all key productive players, and it should make the Browns very tough again. So looking at some of their free agency and draft moves, they didn't really lose a whole lot in terms of big key guys. I'd say the only one, maybe Jordan Elliott, as he moves on to the 49ers, and maybe Joe Flacco, who goes on to the Colts. But other than that, not really a whole lot to note of. Some of the names that they did add was Jordan Hicks from the Minnesota Vikings at linebacker, Quinn Jefferson at edge rusher from the New York Jets. So continuing to add on to that very tough defense. And then to replace Joe Flacco is 2 quarterbacks of name, Jameis Winston from the Saints and Tyler Huntley from the Ravens. A little interesting there. And then their dirty work came within the draft. Continued to address that defense by getting Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State. Pretty good defensive tackle, but comes with character concerns. And they're trying to address that offensive line as well by getting Zach Zinter from Michigan, as well as continuing to address the receiver spot by getting Jamari Thrash from Louisville. So just some of the big key names that the Browns drafted and acquired in free agency. So when you look at the Browns as they're preparing for not just SummerSlam, but also the actual regular season, it becomes apparent to me when you look at the grand scheme of things that their defense is once again going to have to carry this team. Because, I mean, when you look at them, they're still pretty damn good, on paper at least. But I feel like they're going to be as good as they are on paper. Because you still got a quartet of Myles Garrett and za'darius Smith on the edge, Dalvin Thompson and Shelby Harris in the interior. Like, when you look back at last year, they were one of the best front fours in the NFL. I believe, like, when it came down to the rankings, They were the best front four in the NFL in generating pressure and getting to the quarterback. And I believe they're expected to do well again this year. And you look at the additions they made in the draft, like getting Michael Hall, and then getting Quinn Jefferson in free agency. They have a deep rotation of in that front four. And then in the secondary, they're also expected to do well. They were a turnover generating machine last year. And they have some new and familiar faces in this secondary, like the corner duo of Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. And you got new addition from the Kansas City Chiefs, Juan Thornhill. I totally forgot to mention him. So you got some championship experience because, well, as if the Browns had any. But anyway, but this defense is, once again, I feel it's going to have to carry this team for much of the season, especially if Deshaun Watson is not going to be very good. So speaking of the offense, Jerry Jeudy, he's finally going to get his chance to shine. And I believe it's something that he's desperately wanting. I mean, look, Jerry Jeudy, believe he came in 2016, 2017. He's shown some potential, but I believe the problem is he makes a lot of mistakes. He severely underperforms. I believe when you watch him, he kind of messes up a good amount. I mean, I get it. Everyone makes mistakes, but he makes too many of them. So that's why they traded him away. They gave him a new change of scenery, but hey, who knows? Maybe this time around he'll stick the landing with Deshaun Watson, but we'll see. But at least it helps out a receiving core that pretty much only had Amari Cooper in it. So looking at some of the key games for the Cleveland Browns this season, you get off to a big start against the Dallas Cowboys and Dak Prescott. Pretty big interconference game there. And then you go to Jacksonville to take on the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars. And then you got a pretty tough stretch getting close to the midseason. That starts with Cincinnati, then the Baltimore Ravens. So 2 big division games. And all at home, mind you. And then you get Justin Herbert and the Chargers. Oh man, that's a pretty big stretch for this team right here. So obviously, with all that in mind, it all boils down to Deshaun Watson. Will he finally rediscover his old self? Because it's been almost 2 years since Watson played his first game since his suspension from, those controversial off-field acts that I'm not going to talk about. And then since coming back in that week 13 game against the Houston Texans, his old team, he hasn't performed to the level he once played at. And I get it, during that time, since week 13, 2022 onward, and then toward the end of that season, it's clear that he was rusty. It was understandable. But then he had a full offseason last year to prepare. And then when he came back, when the time came to play again, he still looked flustered. And again, he ended up getting hurt on multiple occasions. And then he suffered the shoulder injury that kept him out for the season. And he had to get surgery on that. So this year needs to be the year that Deshaun Watson starts to rediscover his old playing ability. Or else this big fat trade that the skid marks made 2 years ago is going to look like one of the worst in NFL history. If it is already. So for the Browns, they're not going to have the benefit of Joe Flacco this year. He's not going to come back and save their ass and try to make another playoff run. So the Browns better hope that Deshaun Watson can finally rediscover himself in order to make a serious playoff run. If he can do that, then good. This team can challenge the others in the division and even the others inside the conference for a playoff spot. But if not, though, I actually take that bet about the playoff spot. They'll still be in contention for a playoff spot, but not because of Deshaun Watson. It'll mainly because due to their defense and everyone else around the team. And you'll have questions about Deshaun Watson and why he can't play at the level he once did. And, well, why the skid marks even picked him up 2 years ago. So I still believe, again, they'll be in contention for a playoff spot, but you have to wonder about Deshaun Watson going into this season.